Okay, so Falcon and the Winter Soldier has now finished its full season, and in this video I thought we'd take a look back over the series to break down every Easter egg, hidden detail, and bit of trivia that we could find. We open with Sam channeling his inner Iron Man and getting ready to take the shield to the Smithsonian. It's being carried in the same bag as Steve gave him at the end of Avengers Endgame, and him putting it away whereas Steve took it out very much shows his mentality towards it. This scene is interlaced between a mission in which he took down the LAF, who are led by Batroc the Leaper. Batroc can be seen wearing clothing coloured purple and yellow, which he not only dons throughout the season, but is also very similar to what he wore in the Winter Soldier. These colours actually call back to his costumes in the comics, which were always purple and yellow. Sam communicates with Redwing through an inner ear link-up device, and this is actually a play on the source material, as in that Redwing was a real Falcon that he could telepathically communicate with. We're also introduced to Joaquin Torres, who in the source material becomes Falcon when Sam becomes Cap. In this episode he takes a lot of interest in Redwing, and the series ends with him waiting in the wings by waiting with Sam's wings. When it comes to Falcon, two can play that game, and according to comments made by series creator Malcolm Spellman, you can expect to see him back in the MCU too. Now the LAF take to the sky and end up wearing dark green jumpsuits with yellow stripes down them. These are very similar to Hydra's uniform from the comics, and with Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, aka Madame Hydra, showing up in the season, it could be foreshadowing their return. Joaquin Torres talks about the Flag Smashers, and we learn they're led by Karli Morgenthau, who is a gender swap of Karl Morgenthau, aka Flag Smasher in the comics. At the Smithsonian we see Sam donate the shield, and he and Rhodey take a stroll through the Captain America exhibit. Here we can see that the Bucky section has now been expanded, and it includes a bit about his time as the Winter Soldier, as well as the Sokovia Accords. In the list of the vanished, we can catch the name Victoria Alonso, who is a producer at Marvel Studios. They go up to a wall of Captain America propaganda, and we can see a poster of Steve saying, "I want you." Sam stands directly in front of this, giving a nod to how Steve chose him to bear the mantle. There's also a picture of Steve from the first Avenger holding a taxi door, and if we go back to that film we can actually see the woman who snapped this image standing in the crowd. Amongst these posters is the comic in which Cap punched Hitler, and huge shoutouts to Ryan Airy at Screen Crush for pointing out that kids read this in the first Avenger. However, and this is where it gets good, Bucky was removed from this cover because in the comics he was his teen sidekick, whereas that wasn't set up in the MCU. Now I still hate that lad. Now we see Sam's reflection when he stares at the shield, and he doesn't quite line up with it. This is very similar to imagery from Into the Spider-Verse, in which Miles Morales didn't quite meet the mask when he first came face to face with it. However, by the end of the film, his head did line up, and though that doesn't happen in the series, it does give the starting point that Sam doesn't view himself as being worthy. Cut to Winter Soldier on a mission, and at first we don't know if this is the past or present. This is very similar to how Bucky was introduced in the graphic novel Sam Wilson Captain America, and in it was thought for a while that he had turned back to being evil. Bucky wakes up on the floor, which is a callback to when Steve and Sam talked about how they had difficulty sleeping on a mattress at the start of the Winter Soldier. In episode 5, Bucky manages to sleep on something comfy at Sam's house, showing how he is finally starting to be at peace with himself and all the illegal things that he did. See? Eagle pun there. Bucky goes to therapy, and we discover that he's been trying to make amends. Now this scene in which we see a man and woman in a car felt very similar in setup in the way that it was shot to the murder of the Starks, which was also by the hands of Bucky. Whereas in that he killed Howard before moving on to Maria, here he just hits the guy in the face and leans in the window to tell the senator that he's changed. In the Book of Names there are a couple of note, including a Rostov, who is the Marvel villain the Red Barbarian. We learn that this is Steve's notebook, and whereas he was using it to list things to catch up on in the present, Bucky is very much still stuck in the past. Cut to him in Brooklyn, which is where he and Steve grew up as kids. He breaks up a fight in an alley over a trash can, which is similar to how he broke up a fight in an alley involving Steve, who was using a trash can lid. It's a reach. Now cut to Sam going home, and we see his parents' boat is called Paul and Darlene, which were their names in the comics. The story of the boat is very much a metaphor for the shield, as Sam and his family want to get rid of it at first, as they don't think they can live up to its legacy. It's got a lot of bad things going on with it, and at points seems destroyed beyond repair, However, they realise it can still stand as something great, and when people pull together to make something positive, they can do it. Sam and his sister end up keeping the boat in the end and going forward with it, much like how he does with the shield, even though initially it seems like a burden. Get it? Burden. Hey, come on now, that was good. Now Flag Smasher attack happens, and after Torres tells Sam, we see that he's watching the news station WHIH, which is the MCU network that has appeared in several movies. We're introduced to Captain White Boy Summer, aka John Take a Walk on the Wild Side, who's one of the worst people in the world. Now, speaking of worst people in the world, I've just realised I haven't introduced myself. Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka the guy whose bird puns are poultry in motion. And if you find this video exciting, then please click the thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel because I can do breakdowns like this all day. Now jump to episode 2 and we open with John Walker in his old high school locker room. Here he's joined by his wife Olivia, and the scene itself feels like it was ripped right out of the comics. It echoes the one from the first Avenger just before Steve went out on a mission, and in both shots the Captain America character is sat down doubting whether they can do it, and they're joined by the woman that they love who stood up and reassuring them. We're also introduced to his sidekick Battlestar, who, similar to his comic book counterpart, has a large star on his chest. Kinda sucks we'll never get that Battlestar Funko Pop, as I did want one, but I suppose in the end he did end up as a bobblehead. I'm so sorry, that was so bad. Anyway, we hear a marching band playing a rearrangement of the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan, which you might remember from Steve's propaganda tour in the first Avenger. Walker's uniform doesn't have the white in it that Steve's did, and symbolically this shows a lack of innocence. However, his US agent suit does end up getting it, potentially showcasing how the character has changed. His first interview takes place on ABC's Good Morning America, which just so happens to be owned by Disney. Walker is seen training with the shield, and in the comics it took him a while before he was able to use it properly. He ended up having to be taught by Taskmaster, who we now know is popping up in Black Widow. Sam would later do something similar in episode 5 and use pads as a way to throw it as a projectile. Cut to Sam and Bucky meeting at the Air Force Base, and the pair want to quack the case. Sam uses the term the Big Three, which means androids, aliens and wizards, and this is a nod to the three enemies that the Avengers have fought, with them being Ultron, Thanos and Loki. On the plane, Bucky asks Sam what his plan is before he jumps out of it, and this mirrors the conversation between Steve and Tony in the Avengers. Cap asked Tony what his plan of attack was, and he replied with,
"I have a plan. Attack."
Bucky then jumps out of the plane with a parachute, which is a nod to when Steve did it at the start of the Winter Soldier. Sam also mocks him and says he got it on camera, which could be a reference to Shuri doing something similar to T'Challa in the Black Panther. The name the White Wolf is also brought up, which is a nod to the post-credit scene of that movie. We see Bucky doing his super fast running to catch up to the semi-trucks, and this was of course displayed in the tunnel scene chase from Civil War. Walker and Hoskins swoop in to save the day, and later they pick Sam and Bucky up on the road. Bucky asks him if he ever jumped on a grenade, which is a nod to when Steve did it in the first Avenger. Walker says that he's done it 4 times, but states that he used his helmet, showing that he wasn't in any real danger. Interestingly, in that scene, we can also catch Peggy running towards the grenade, showing that she was willing to sacrifice herself too. This could set up the what if story that is set to debut in summer, in which she becomes Captain America instead of Steve. Sam and Bucky travel to meet Isaiah Bradley, and beforehand they come across his grandson Eli, who in the comics becomes a hero known as the Patriot. Isaiah's origins very much play upon the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was a systemically racist experiment that involved the government lying about treating the disease in black people so that they could study the long-term effects of it. Instead of treating it, they merely used placebos, and this allowed people with it to go on and infect others, whilst also giving them things like blindness, deafness and death. It's a horrible chapter in human history, and something that was brought up in the graphic novel The Truth, which centered around Isaiah's journey. Truth is the title of episode 5, and in that Isaiah mentions the 332nd, which is also the name of the Tuskegee Air Force. In that entry, Isaiah brings up how he saved a number of POWs and was jailed for it. This juxtaposes Steve's journey, who did the same thing in World War II and was instead praised as a hero. Outside we get a scene in which Sam is accosted by the police, and in the next one we see that the opposite thing happens with Walker when he's asked to take selfies with them. The episode ends with Bucky and Sam going to Zemo, and we can see that his cell number is 2187, which just so happened to be layers on the Death Star in A New Hope. Jump to episode 3, and we see Walker acting unpheasant when interrogating someone. Not an Easter egg there, just a crap pun. Now Bucky goes to Zemo, and we see him uttering the mind control words from Civil War. This scene mirrors the Silence of the Lambs in not only the setup of the pair looking at each other through glass, but also the arc that they go on. Like Bucky, Clarice went to a criminal for help, and said criminal ended up escaping, much like how Zemo does. Zemo ends up looking a lot more like his comic book counterpart than he did in Civil War, and not only does he get his purple mask, but he also wears a coat with a fur pattern on it that's extremely similar to the source material. On the plane they end up discussing the Marvin Gaye album Trouble Man, which is what Sam played to Steve at the end of The Winter Soldier when he was in hospital. Cut to Carly at the GRC HQ, and we see her visit Mama Donya. In her hands she holds a Hamza, which in religion provides protection from the evil eye. A wall marking for the power broker at one point appears in Madripoor, and the symbols used are the character's eyes. This sign itself is playing on the phrase "Big Brother is watching you," which comes from George Orwell's 1984. There are theories that I've done deep dives on which talk about how Sharon wasn't the original power broker, and this sign definitely seems to lend itself to that. In Madripoor, we see that Sam is pretending to be the Smiling Tiger, a villain from the comics that ended up hiding out in the city at one point. They go to the Bronze Monkey, which in the source material has been called both that, as well as the Brass Monkey Saloon. There's also the Princess Bar, which was Wolverine's home away from home, any time that he visited the city. Not long after that, they're taken to Selby, who may be playing on Suzanne Selby from the comics. Sharon Carter kills her using a sniper rifle, which is riffing on the comics in which she too used one when tracking the Winter Soldier. At her apartment, we see the best dance moves that we've ever seen, which are so good that Marvel had to release an hour-long cut of Zemo going off. Hashtag release the Zemo cut and hashtag restore the Snyderverse, you scumbag. I know it's not your fault, Marvel. Shortly after they go to Nagel, a scientist who's ripped straight out of Isaiah Bradley's origin story The Truth, in that he injected him with super soldier serum, whereas here we learn that he extracted it from his DNA in order to duplicate it. After a shootout, they go to leave, and Sam says to Bucky, "You're not going to move your seat up, are you?" This is a play on Civil War in which the positions were reversed and Sam refused to move his forward. The journey to Latvia, a real location that Doctor Doom's home, Latveria, is playing upon. After a run-in with Io, we see flashbacks of their past together in Wakanda, and Bucky does a trial by fire where she attempts to activate him. He is, however, free, and we can hear the music in the background change from the Winter Soldier theme to a more hopeful one as he gains control. At Zemo's HQ, they discuss the idea of supremacy and how those that seek to become superhumans will be corrupted by it. This foreshadows John Walker's arc in the episode, and also Carly's throughout the season. They go to the GRC camp, and Zemo tempts the kids with a Turkish delight, which is what the White Witch used to tempt children with in The Lion, the Witch in the Wardrobe. Jump to a graveyard to see Carly getting her stash of super soldier serum, which comes in vials that look identical to how they were in the first Avenger. Here they have a awkward conversation in which a flag smasher says he looked up to Captain America his entire life, and in death he ends up looking up to him too. Ba-boom cha. Now the Dora Milaje arrive to take Zemo in, and they disarm Bucky. He ends up reconnecting it and winding his arm similar to how he did in The Winter Soldier. The Dora Milaje also stamp on the shield to pick it up, much like how Steve did at the end of the elevator fight in the aforementioned movie. Zemo escapes and is referred to as El Chapo, who in real life was a drug dealer that had tunnels built under his home so that he could evade law enforcement. Walker and Battlestar go to the Flag Smasher hideout, and they enter kicking the door with pistols drawn, much like how Steve and the Howling Commandos did in the first Avenger. Sam and Bucky end up going there too, along with Carly, and Bucky does a knife spin at one point during the fight. This is something that we saw him pull off in The Winter Soldier, and it's also a callback to the first Avenger. In that film, when Howard Stark gave Steve the shield, he said he would need it as Hydra wouldn't be coming at him with a pocket knife, but Bucky ended up doing that in his following solo film. Walker ends up killing the Flag Smasher outside, and though typically a shield is used for defense, here it's used for offense. This shows that he's changed the meaning of the shield, much in the same way that he's changed what Captain America means too. He's truly ruined it, and seeing the blood on it shows just how much its legacy has been warped. The scene itself is a direct callback to the ending of Civil War, in which Steve could have killed Tony with the shield, but instead he drove it into the arc reactor. This showed that both had a choice to kill their opponent, but one decided that, if that's what it took to be Captain America, that they didn't want to do it. Steve left the shield behind, whereas Walker straps it on tighter, showing where their two paths went in different directions. People stand around and film the scene on their phones, which is a symbol of how cell phones have been used recently to capture police brutality. Jump over to episode 5 and we watch as Walker flees the scene. During a moment he calms himself by remembering the words of Battlestar, and this is similar to the comics in which the character would actually talk to his parents long after they died. Much like Lamar, the murder of them sent him off on a darker path, and the show has clearly changed things up to mirror the original work. In the garage we get a lot of nods to Civil War, including the scene in which Steve and Sam managed to restrain Bucky. Similar to the show, that moment came off the back of a rampage carried out by a super soldier, and even the positioning of the characters is exactly the same. The framing for the Battle of Civil War 2 reappears here, with a 2-on-1 fight involving Bucky and a Captain America. When Bucky and John fight one-on-one, it's very similar to the battle between the former and Steve in the street during the Winter Soldier. Some of the moves are even ripped right out that movie, making for an amazing fight scene in the show. The battle ends with Bucky dropping the shield on the floor before walking off, much like how he and Steve did at the end of Civil War. Sam also tries to wipe the blood off of it, but it won't go, showing how much Walker has tarnished its reputation. Walker returns to Washington and has to answer before a panel, which is similar to what happened in the comics after he was defeated by Steve. From here we meet Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, who's wearing a long black coat and recruiting superpowered people. This of course mirrors the Nick Fury post-credit scene at the end of Iron Man, and she will likely be reflecting him and creating either the Thunderbolts or the Dark Avengers. We jump to the Sokovian Memorial and see Zemo taken to the raft, which we of course saw in Civil War. This location is overseen by General Ross, who in the comics helps to make the aforementioned Thunderbolts. They were originally led by Baron Zemo, so all the pieces are falling into place, and as always, it's all connected. Now we watch the community come together to fix the boat up, and Sam's nephews call him Uncle Sam, which is a bit on the nose. We learn the Flag Smashers' plan is to attack the GRC meeting room, which seems to be heavily based on the War Room from Dr. Strangelove that was also parodied in Watchmen. Batroc meets Carly at the bench and gives her a suitcase, and this is actually the same location that Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson opened their own suitcase at during Die Hard with a Vengeance. Sam opens up his suitcase, called that because it has a suit in it, and we as an audience don't get to see it, which could be riffing on the one from Pulp Fiction. We also see John Walker building a new shield, and this moment is very similar to when Tony Stark first created the Mark I armor all the way back in the first Iron Man movie. Now episode 6 is called One World, One People, the mantra of the Flag Smashers. However, it's also a song sung by Femi Kuti. In it he puts across the point that black people have been held back by corrupt governments and politicians, but that there is still hope people will rise up against these forces. This is very much what the Flag Smashers are trying to do with violence, but in the entry, Sam manages to change things just by talking. Sam and Bucky travel to the GRC building, and along the way the latter meets Sharon, who is wearing a prosthetic mask similar to the one that Black Widow wore in The Winter Soldier. However, it also holds another meaning, as it speaks to how her character is very two-faced. Sam arrives in the building and he says that he's Captain America, to which someone replies, "I thought he was on the moon." This is obviously a callback to the conspiracy theory from the first episode, and it could also be a nod to how Steve might be working with S.W.O.R.D. now. Now Sam fights with Batroc in a moment that's very similar to the opening of The Winter Soldier, in which Steve went head to head with him. In the street, John Walker arrives to show that he's still worthy of being Captain America, and though he doesn't fight Sam, this entire scene feels very akin to Sam Wilson Captain America, which had a moment in which Walker tried to publicly embarrass him in the street so that people would lose faith in him. However, Walker has a moment in which he can choose between saving people or getting revenge, and he does the right thing. From this point on, Sam saves the day in a moment that's very similar to Iron Man saving the ferry in Spider-Man Homecoming. Because of his tech and the symbol that he carries, he's very much a combination of both Iron Man and Captain America. Heck, even the helicopter scene in the sky reminded me a lot of the rescue one from Iron Man 3, and Sam getting hit with pipes before being submerged in water is very similar to Tony being hit with cars and landing in the sea when his house was attacked. He chases the Flag Smashers, which is when we get a reveal that Sharon Carter is the power broker all along. Now, in the basement, Sam refuses to fight Carly, which is very similar to Steve at the end of The Winter Soldier when he refused to fight Bucky. She's killed, and then Sam carries her body in a moment that very much echoes the painting of Cain and Abel. On the outside, Bucky and Walker capture the Flag Smashers using the app, and shout outs the Canadian lad for pointing out that this is the same phone that the woman earlier in the episode gave him. She was clearly part of the villain team, and because the app was already installed, they were able to track them. Sam berates the Senate and says that every time he picks up the shield, he knows that there are millions who are gonna hate him, which is very much a comment on the reaction that some fans have given the show whenever it discusses things from a certain viewpoint. We then see the Raft, namely one of the cells from Civil War, and Zemo reading the same book that he had in his cell in episode 3. This shows that he hasn't changed and is very much the same as he was when we first met him in this story. Jump to Washington to meet up with Val, as well as US Agent, who has a new black suit which is ripped straight from the comics. Interestingly, his last line is "I'm back," which is pulled from Captain America 354, which was the issue that he returned in. Sam takes Isaiah to the Smithsonian, and when they're walking through the exhibit, we see a Shattered Avengers logo, which looks very similar to the one used in trailers for Endgame. The show ends with the title changing to Captain America and the Winter Soldier, and we go to the post-credits scene with Sharon now starting an uprising in the government, similar to what Hydra did with S.H.I.E.L.D. Now that ends the series, and hopefully they landed the bird. And that's terrible. And I just want to give a big shout out to all my Easter egg hunters out there like Ryan Airy, Beyond Epic, Superhero Nexus, New Rock Stars, Canadian Lad, Real Rejects, 3C Films, and the person I inevitably forgot that I'll be kicking myself for as soon as this video goes live. I'm sorry we have beef over me forgetting to include you there, and I hate myself. Trust me, I hate myself. You did a great job. Now obviously I'd love to hear your thoughts on this series and if there's any Easter eggs we missed. Comment below and let me know, and if you want something else to watch then make sure you check out our breakdown of all the things you missed in Mortal Kombat. We've pointed out the coolest details from the film, so make sure you give it a watch right after this. With that out of the way, thank you for checking the video out. I've been Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.